Imagine enjoying fresh fish in the scorching heat of summer, thousands of years before the first refrigerator ever hummed to life. Picture Persian merchants offering chilled rose water in the desert, or Roman emperors savoring ice-cooled wine during harvest festivals. This wasn't fantasy, it was reality. For millennia, civilizations across the globe engineered massive cold storage systems that preserved ice through blazing summers and enabled food security in ways that would astound modern engineers. Welcome to Ancient Edge, where we unearth the ingenuity of forgotten masters, who conquered the fundamental challenge of preservation without a single watt of electricity. The history of pre-industrial ice preservation represents one of humanity's most overlooked technological triumphs. These weren't simple holes in the ground or crude root cellars. They were architectural marvels, community enterprises, and economic powerhouses that shaped trade routes, influenced dietary habits, and even determined the fates of empires. Today, we're diving deep into these extraordinary cold storage systems to reveal how ancient societies defied the relentless march of decay. Ancient architects of chill. The foundation of pre-industrial cold storage began with understanding a simple principle: ice melts slower when insulated from heat and kept stable. But translating this into practice required masterful engineering. Ice houses were serious investments built by communities who understood that controlling temperature meant controlling survival itself. The most effective designs incorporated the earth itself as natural insulation. Builders would excavate partially or fully underground chambers, often carved into hillsides where surrounding soil maintained stable, cool temperatures. The walls of these structures were phenomenally thick, typically between 2 and 4 feet, constructed from stone, brick, or heavy timber. But the critical innovation lay in what filled the spaces within sawdust, straw, salt marsh hay, peat moss, or charcoal. These materials trapped air in their cellular structures, creating barriers that dramatically slowed heat transfer. When packed tightly around ice blocks, they transformed ordinary structures into time machines that preserved winter's bounty through the heat of August. Perhaps nowhere was this architectural mastery more spectacularly demonstrated than in ancient Persia, where engineers created the yakhchal, structures that could store ice through summers exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Rising from the desert landscape like enormous beehives, these dome-shaped ice houses began with sarouj, a specialized mortar mixing sand, clay, lime, egg whites, goat hair, and ash in precise proportions. This material was nearly waterproof and possessed remarkable insulating properties. The domes featured thick walls that tapered toward the top, minimizing surface area exposed to the murderous sun. But yakhchals weren't merely passive containers, they were active cooling systems that harnessed natural forces with breathtaking sophistication. Many incorporated badgers, wind catchers that rose above the structure like ancient air conditioning towers. These caught prevailing breezes and directed them down into the ice chamber below, creating constant air circulation that enhanced evaporative cooling. At the base, builders excavated deep pits where ice sat in permanent shade, surrounded by thermally stable earth. During winter nights, water was channeled into shallow pools adjacent to the structure. The desert's extreme temperature swings meant these pools would freeze solid overnight. Workers would break up the ice and transport it into the yakhchal before sunrise, repeating this process throughout the cold season. The ice harvest, a monumental task. The engineering of storage was only half the equation. The harvest itself was a massive undertaking that transformed entire communities each winter. In New England during the 18th and 19th centuries, ice harvesting became an economic juggernaut that employed thousands and shipped frozen water to destinations as distant as India and Australia. But this industry had ancient precedents stretching back millennia. The harvest began when lakes and rivers froze thick enough to support workers and equipment, typically requiring at least 12 inches of solid ice. Teams would clear the ice of snow, then score the surface into a grid pattern. The tools were deceptively simple: long ice saws with specially designed teeth, ice plows drawn by horses, and various poles, tongs, and hooks for manipulation. Workers would saw along scored lines, creating blocks weighing anywhere from 50 to 300 pounds. These blocks would be floated through channels to shore, hauled up ramps using ice tongs, and loaded onto sledges lined with insulating materials for transport. This was community mobilization on an epic scale. Villages in ice-producing regions would essentially pause normal economic activity during harvest season because the economic returns justified the effort. A successful harvest meant income for workers, preserved food for families, and trade goods that could be exchanged for unavailable commodities. Large commercial operations in 19th century America harvested tens of thousands of tons annually from single bodies of water. Historical records from Frederick Tudor's ice trade document shipments exceeding 10,000 tons being transported from Massachusetts to the Caribbean, South America, and beyond. But commercial ventures merely amplified practices that ancient societies had perfected on smaller scales. Beyond preservation, a way of life. Ice preservation wasn't simply about keeping food from spoiling, though that alone represented a revolution in human nutrition and health. The ability to maintain cold storage year-round fundamentally transformed societies, creating opportunities and luxuries that defined civilizations. Food security was, without a doubt, the most profound impact. Before artificial cooling, human diets, they followed these really rigid, seasonal patterns. But then ice storage changed this whole equation. Hunters could, preserve game beyond immediate consumption. Fishermen could extend their catch's viability, which enabled trade with inland communities. Dairy farmers could store milk, butter, and cheese without immediate spoilage. This kind of preservation extended market seasons, stabilized food supplies during those vulnerable spring months, and allowed communities to build genuine food reserves against disasters. The medical applications were, honestly, equally transformative. Ancient physicians understood that cold reduced inflammation, numbed pain, and could even slow certain ailments. Greek and Roman medical texts actually describe ice being applied to wounds, used to reduce fevers, and incorporated into various treatments. Hospitals in medieval Persia specifically incorporated access to ice houses, recognizing that patients recovered better when kept cool. Ice also enabled early forms of surgery by providing rudimentary anesthesia and reducing bleeding. Yet, perhaps nothing demonstrates ice preservation's cultural impact more vividly than luxury consumption. Roman Emperor Nero allegedly sent runners into mountains to retrieve snow, which was then mixed with fruit and honey to create a sort of primitive ice cream. Chinese nobility during the Tang dynasty enjoyed frozen desserts made possible by government-operated ice houses. Persian shahs offered guests chilled sherbets in elaborate ceremonies that displayed wealth and technological prowess. The ability to serve chilled beverages in sweltering heat announced that the host commanded resources beyond the ordinary, that they had, in effect, conquered the fundamental constraint of seasonal temperature. Trade routes developed specifically around ice transport. Ice became a genuine export product, shipped from regions with harsh winters to tropical markets that were, honestly, desperate for cooling. This trade created infrastructure, specialized ships with insulated holds, way stations designed for rapid transfer, and networks of merchants who really understood the complex logistics of transporting frozen water before it melted. The ice trade was the precursor to the modern cold chain, foreshadowing the refrigerated shipping and storage that now underpins global food systems. As we face contemporary challenges around energy consumption and climate change, these ancient cold storage systems offer lessons beyond just historical curiosity. The principles that allowed yak-chals to preserve ice through desert summers, thermal mass, insulation, passive cooling, strategic placement, well, they remain fundamentally sound. Modern architects are, rediscovering these techniques, incorporating earth sheltering, evaporative cooling, and natural ventilation into contemporary designs that dramatically reduce energy requirements. The sophistication of pre-industrial ice preservation reminds us that technological progress isn't always linear. Sure, mechanical refrigeration brought unprecedented convenience, but also massive energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and dependence on complex supply chains. The ancient methods were, honestly, inherently sustainable, powered entirely by human labor and natural processes. While we can't just abandon modern refrigeration, understanding how past societies achieved similar ends through different means really expands our toolkit for addressing current challenges. Standing before the ruins of an ancient yak-chal or reading accounts of massive ice harvests, we're confronted with an uncomfortable truth. Our ancestors weren't primitive people fumbling toward modernity. They were sophisticated engineers who understood thermodynamics deeply enough to create systems that worked reliably for millennia. Their mastery of cold storage, achieved without electricity, without chemical refrigerants, without fossil fuels, stands as testimony to human ingenuity, operating within natural constraints rather than attempting to overcome them through brute force. If you found value in this journey through humanity's ingenious conquest of temperature, subscribe to Ancient Edge, where we continue excavating the hidden knowledge that shaped civilizations and can guide us still. Share this video with anyone fascinated by how our ancestors solved problems we now take for granted. Join us next time as we uncover more secrets from the ancient world. Secrets that might just hold answers for our modern challenges. The past has more to teach us than we ever imagined.